not just
who's responsible for the lie? The lie that it was human error, that there was 2 drones that got mistaken and some guy was, there's a guy sitting there, right? That's what you imagine. It's human error. The radar's not down 80% of the time. There's some poor dude in some dark room just protecting everybody there, and he just slipped up for 1 second. There was a mistake, a communication. He's a good guy or whatever, but yeah, we just had a little human error, or, we lost a few, whatever. Gold Star families, do the bodies, whatever. Then all of a sudden it's like, no alert system, no functioning heavy defenses. Like, it's just a lie. They know they fucked up and they just fucking lie to us every single time. Hi, everybody. This is John back from Real Veteran News. I'm here with my good old friend, Charles Chuck Seal. Welcome back, Chuck. How you doing?
Thanks, good to be here.
It's been a little while. Everything's going good for you?
Yeah, everything's great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Do you want to introduce yourself again in case people didn't see you on last time?
Yeah, sure. Chuck Seal, and I was in the Army for about 5 years. In the early 2000s, I was at the State Department after that doing cybersecurity work, and now I do cybersecurity consulting and a variety of other stuff.
Sounds good. Very, very accurate. So first news this week is all about the Tower 22 attack and the investigation into what happened. We lost the 3 young military personnel there, and plus there was like 40 at least that were wounded, some of them pretty seriously. The first thing I want to talk about is that the article from The Intercept that is saying that it was actually a secret drone base and that there's a cover-up saying that it was a logistics support base. They're saying that from interviews from like Air Force personnel there, that it was a staging area for SOF. There was medevac flights out of there, and they were also doing drone missions. They say main objective was taking out targets. All these bases, this is like, I want to hear what you have to think in a second, but basically policy-wise, it looks like all of these bases, like all over Syria and everything, are part of this anti-ISIS coalition. And there probably are still some ISIS there, but it's kind of like an area denial. They're kind of just like occupying this vacuum, and they've destroyed ISIS functionally during the Trump administration. And then John Bolton, who is national security advisor there, was like, well, we got these bases. Let's like use this position to counter Iran. So then it shifted to an countering Iran strategy, but Iran, more powerful than ISIS and is influential within the Iraqi government, which we are like there at their pleasure, essentially. So what do you think about the secret drone base?
I honestly don't know what to think about that. I'm not sure that that's accurate. It possibly could be. It certainly I think it makes sense that that's the kind of thing that we might pivot to. And those are the sorts of things that you're going to keep secret anyway, right? That's those capabilities are something you might not talk about at an individual base. I think, we continue to be in a mess in the Middle East, right? We're continuing to project our power there. We've decided that this is going to be our problem. And now, as tensions continue to increase in the region, as the, tensions with Iran build up and the situation in Israel build up, now, we're stuck kind of in the middle of this, and I think we're exposed. And I think you've got, problems if we're not well enough secured in some of these bases, right? If this truly, especially if this is truly a base where we're using it to launch drones and project power in the region, we need to ensure that we have, adequate capability to detect incoming attacks and respond to those things in a timely manner.
Well, issue for me, there's several issues. One of which, if the main objective is taking out targets, there's really only 2 groups of people that are going to be doing that over there. And it seems more like the military version than the intelligence version. So they're saying that the intelligence warned 4 months that it was only a matter of time, and that there was a precedent of attack on Tower 22, which was supposedly a support base for Al-Tanf base nearby. And I'm not familiar with the geography all that right, but basically what they're saying is that they were ignoring this issue of the lacking air defenses. And that's a problem because, you're basically hanging these people out to dry. It reminds me of Benghazi. It reminds me of Kabul. It reminds me of Korangal Valley. It reminds me of a lot of these where there's some ambiguous political objective that's being served by these young people leaving their safety of their homes and their families and going and living in the desert without adequate protection, doing a mission that we're not really sure what it is right now. And again, there's no one in charge. So it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely agree with you. I feel like, if you're yes, you're going to take risks. There are things that we're going to do where we simply don't have the luxury of ensuring that there's adequate security. But when you have a location that's been in place for a number of years, when we're not in a sort of hot conflict situation, you have the ability to ensure adequate security. If you have intelligence coming in telling you that you need to be worried about this specific threat, you need to start preparing for that specific threat. You need to be ready for it. You don't just leave people out there exposed. To me, that's a super troubling way to operate. You've got people who are depending on you to pay attention to this intelligence and to respond and keep them safe and secure. And now they're not here.
So Intercept as well did a longer article, talking about the lack of air defenses at Tower 22. The interviews that they did, they said there were minimal, if any. The radar system was broken 80% of the time. They were relying on aircrafts. Nobody adhered to blackout rules. There was no alert system, and they were alerting people by knocking on doors. Again, there had been previous attacks on the nearby Al-Tanf base, and they had no large air defense. They had no sophisticated air defense systems there. They told us that there was a confusion that between a American drone or a friendly drone and this one came in, but now they're saying that a friendly drone was coming in, but that had nothing to do with it. The enemy drone likely flew under the radar because they just had inadequate defenses, came in and they just hit direct hit. So like you said, extension of the Gaza war. So like once the Gaza war started and then Israel started responding, Iran's like, all right, we're going to put some pressure on the Americans. And then, this is one of the ways that they're doing so.
Yeah, for sure. And as I said earlier, I mean, we put ourselves right in the middle of this and we've sort of allowed that to happen. I'm not necessarily commenting on whether that's good or bad, but from this sort of perspective and us, being integral to this, that it has consequences and stuff like this this is what comes from it.
I don't think there's going to be any consequences. The only consequences were for the people that got hurt, not for the people in charge or the politicians.
No, and there definitely should be. But I mean, those are real consequences, right? People lost their lives and other people were injured, and those are real serious consequences that are as you know well, that are like very serious to people at home and to people on the ground. This is serious, and we've decided that we're in the middle of this. And I'm not positive that that's the right answer, but it is where we need to be at this point because of the way we operate in the Middle East. If we're going to do that, then we need to provide for adequate security for people in the region. You've got warfighters there operating, and they need to know that they're able to operate safely and securely. And that, like you say, a drone can't just come in under the radar and take people out. That feels a little bit crazy to me. And they do need some kind of review. How did this happen? Why did this happen? This is not brand new. We're not in the middle of some brand new conflict where they just rolled into this place a week ago. And of course, we don't have adequate, air defenses and adequate detection capabilities. This has been there for a long time. I struggle to think of a good excuse for this.
Well, it's a failure. And the young people, obviously, you're taking your life in your hands when you go to some secret base in the Middle East. Even if you are a heavy equipment operator, you're out there, a rocket could hit you, anything. What they don't expect is that the people in charge will leave them unprotected. I mean, everyone understands like one gets through or a suicide bomber gets through or whatever happens or an accident or whatever. But this is bullshit, because there has to be some bureaucratic reason why this didn't happen. It was either just like plain like bureaucratic inaction, like they're just lazy, they got lost in the sauce. But I mean, there are people who are directly responsible for securing these bases, and none of them are going to pay the piper for this, and they'll probably just get promoted on up, and then that reinforces a culture of like we can all kind of get away with it as long as we tell the public that it was some kind of unavoidable thing. And then we also have, there's this, I've been thinking about this a lot, but there's this perverse incentive in the U.S. military to lie to us. It's like Pat Tillman, it's like the missing Navy SEALs, it's all this stuff. It's like the righteous strike. They have this perverse incentive to just like spin some tall tale as soon as something happens, because they'll get some like propaganda value out of it, or they'll ameliorate some bad news that they don't want to tell us. And that way the president can bring the bodies home, get through the conversations with the Gold Star families, the news cycle can move on, and then they find out what happened. And then they kind of just like trickle it out there, and then, but it's old news.
Yeah. And, I think some of these things are complicated, right? As you said. So to get to the bottom of this, if they're telling us they have answers right now, I think that's difficult to believe, because this is probably a complicated problem. This could be a funding problem. This could be an issue with oversight. This could be an issue with folks on the ground. This could be an issue with folks in Washington. It can be all of those. It's probably some contribution of all of those things. And so you need some sort of like comprehensive review to figure out how that stuff happened. And I'm not necessarily saying that that means that everything they've said so far has been totally honest. But I would say that, in order to actually understand what happened, you need more time, because there needs to be some kind of comprehensive review. I imagine there are 5 or 6 failures across 5 or 6 different portions of the organization, and by organization I mean the whole government, right? Not just.
Who's responsible for the lie? The lie that it was human error, that there was 2 drones that got mistaken, and some guy was, there's a guy sitting there, right? That's what you imagine. It's human error. The radar's not down 80% of the time. There's some poor dude in some dark room just protecting everybody there, and he just slipped up for 1 second. There was a mistake, a communication. He's a good guy or whatever, but yeah, we just had a little human error, or, we lost a few, whatever. Gold Star families, do the bodies, whatever. Then all of a sudden it's like, no alert system, no functioning heavy defenses. Like, it's just a lie. They know they fucked up, and they just fucking lie to us every single time.
Yeah, I guess maybe I am a little more, I provide a little bit more leeway on those kind of things than you do, because I do feel like you get in the situation and there are answers being demanded, and sometimes that leads folks to respond, can lead an organization like the government, like the DoD, to respond with the information that they have right now, what it looks like, and that may not be accurate, right? Initial impressions may be incorrect. I'm not so convinced that it's an out-and-out lie.
Okay, so
it is possible, but I'm unconvinced that it has to be an out-and-out lie. It could be that initial impression tells you this, and like I said, what you really need is a complete review. You don't need to just give your initial impression.
Chuck, fuck the fucking review, okay? What the generals are doing every single fucking time is they sit on their high throne back in DC or wherever the fuck their office is. They call down there and they're like, what happened? And the guy's like, oh, I don't know. Some SEALs fell off a boat. Maybe one of them went in. He's like, oh, one of them dove in after the other one. That's what happened. They're like cherry picking false impressions that they know are false, that they can just deny, like they can just say fog of war later. They're cherry picking politically convenient little stories and like spinning this stuff up in the hopes that no one ever finds out about it. And it's just a manipulation, gaslighting, and they do it every single time. The review can happen 6 months later or whatever, but like they have this like smoke screen they put in front of us every single time, until people are paying attention to something else.
Yeah, and I'm sure that at times it is intentional, but I think I'm a little less convinced than you are that this is like an intentional action every single time. I feel like there's a little bit more to it, and I think it's more complicated than that. But we don't know. We're not inside, so we don't know.
It's an ingrained cultural paradigm because most of what they're doing is classified. So they have this, right? Oh, we tell them this, we don't tell them that. And so it like muddies the waters of them having to tell us the truth. And they can always just delay it, and just be like, yeah, Pat Tillman was fighting for his country. He was a hero, rah, go Pat Tillman. And then like later on, it's like, oh, that's not really what happened, In
my experience, folks are usually telling the truth as they know it and excluding classified information. I think that's my experience. That's from my experience from the inside. Is they may leave information out, but folks are not actively lying. They may have a wrong impression initially, or even in the early stages of an investigation, and they may as a result put out information that turns out to be incorrect. In my experience, folks are not knowingly putting out false information.
Yeah, they're not actively lying. They have lawyers that work for them. They have these professional liars that spin up these tales and be like, well, you don't have to tell them that. Tell them this, emphasize this. Tell them this first, then tell them that, and then they come up with these strategies in order to avoid embarrassment. And this is all just embarrassment. They're just embarrassed leaders who let this happen. And so they just like massage the truth and then they rationalize to themselves.
I will say it is certainly fair to characterize public affairs as sometimes asking, would it be accurate to say, right? And coming across with a statement, looking for something that they do want to say and seeing if they can fit it in. I think that in my experience, again, it's not said unless the answer to that question is yes, it's accurate. But that is certainly, in some respects, the narrative driving the discussion a little bit, the narrative you want driving the discussion a little bit.
Well, it's just another in a long list of these failures where they're embarrassed and they don't want to tell us the truth about how they got our people killed as part of their, far-flung foreign policy adventures in these lands that they don't understand and they're not paying attention to. I mean, There's no way that Biden even knew about this place before it happened. And he's probably already forgotten. Nor
would you expect him to know about that, right? I don't think at that level and with the breadth of issues that the president has to deal with that he should know about individual bases and the specific operations in countries. There are some that he needs to be aware of, and this may simply not be one of those that he needs to be aware of. He's got people to whom he should be delegating the authority to deal with these things, and it should be handled properly. Clearly, in this case, it wasn't. And we didn't just enter the Middle East. We have been there for a long time. We've been in these locations for a considerable amount of time. And so we should have built them up. Things will go wrong, stuff will happen, but it shouldn't be negligence and it shouldn't be neglect. You want warfighters to go over there with confidence that the U.S. government is going to do everything they can to safeguard their lives while they're there. Things will go wrong, and you are putting yourself on. But that's what I mean. That's my point. Is we need to be doing that. It's not fair, and the DoD budget is enormous. I mean, we can come back to that in so many of the things that we discuss on this channel. The DoD budget is absolutely enormous, and
because they're ripping us off.
It may not be properly allocated because it is not being used to take care of you. You could turn to Congress and say we didn't have the money to secure these folks. But that's just, I can't buy that argument, right?
They didn't have the brain cells.
There is money.
No, the brain cells are missing. It's not the money. If someone in Northern Virginia could have made some money by protecting these people, they would have been protected. But there was no one out there that could make enough money to protect these young kids, so they're all on the ground now. I just don't get it. Ukraine's got a new strategy, and they're doing this whole new kind of like Lincoln, like Abraham Lincoln, he like changes generals out and stuff. So Zelensky, Ukrainian president, obviously had this commander-in-chief since the beginning of the war, Zaluzny. And Zelensky got a conflict with Zaluzny because Zaluzny thinks that Ukraine needs to raise up 500,000 soldiers in order to be able to continue to fight Russia. Zelensky doesn't buy it. Zaluzny thinks that it's a long-term stalemate. He wants an active defense. Zelensky wants like counterattacks. He wants to like take back Russian territory. He wants to be a little bit more aggressive. I talked about it before, but basically in a previous show, but Zelensky tried to quietly move him out, give him a new job or whatever, bring in the guys he wanted. Zaluzny refused, was like, fuck you, I'm staying. And then Zelensky had to like kind of marshal his forces to like literally just kind of like edge the guy out because he wouldn't really like move, and he's more popular than him. But it seems like he's done it, and Zaluzny has realized that like he kind of has to relinquish. And so the new guy is General Alexander Syrsky, who's famous for fighting in Bakhmut for 9 months. He's more of the mind that Ukraine can do these counterattacks and can re-energize their military and everything like that. He supposedly was the architect of the counteroffensive in Kharkiv, which is the only really successful Ukrainian operation that they've had, except on the Black Sea. Like in the Black Sea, they've done well because they use drones. Kharkiv, September 2022, and then that set up the Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023, which was like a total flop.
There's something to be said for consistency, right? But this war is also dragging on, and Ukraine maybe does need new tactics. And you get a disagreement at the top between the president and the guy running operations, and maybe this is a right answer. I think trying out a new way of operating could change the dynamic, and certainly when Ukraine has done better than anybody thought that they would do. Again, like I guess it sounds like I'm talking on both sides of this because I think it's super complicated. Ukraine has done much better than expected, but Ukraine is not winning this war, and it is dragging on for a long time. If a change could possibly bring about an advantage for Ukraine, that would be fantastic. If you could beat down Russia a little bit, if you can change public perception there, if you can use some kind of asymmetric capabilities to pull ahead or seemingly pull ahead and cause some cessation here, that's fantastic. At the same time, you've got a guy who's performed much better than anybody anticipated for an extremely long period of time against a better resourced and more capable, theoretically more capable enemy. And you're pulling him out. So I don't know. He hasn't won, but he's also done a lot more than anybody thought he could. So I feel like it is quite a complicated situation. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't really see a huge difference in what they talk about wanting to do. They all want to use more of the UAVs so they don't get more Ukrainians killed. They know they need more soldiers. Sirski is talking about improving troop rotations because some of these guys have been at the front line for like 700 days in a row. Yeah, I mean, I don't see that much difference. I don't know if it's like a political thing to make Zelensky seem like he's in charge. And Zelensky was more popular than him. I assume that they have like different conversations. Like I assume that Zelensky has his conversation with Zelensky, and he's known him for 2 years. They've been working together for 2 years. Maybe for whatever reason, he's not liking that. He's got this new guy, he's a little bit younger. He's has some new ideas, maybe, I don't know. And he just wants that. And so he decided what he wanted, and he's like the president or whatever. So,
and who knows what's going on in the background? Like you say, it could be significantly politically driven. That's always possible. It could be personality based. They may have had disagreements. I mean, that stuff is the sort of thing that doesn't tend to come out, right? They could have had significant personality-based disagreements and thought they couldn't work together anymore. They could have truly had differing visions for where they stand or where they need to go. It's so hard to say, right? Like, what is actually driving this decision? And I don't think that you don't get the impression that we would necessarily get a full picture of all of that from them in this current situation.
Let's just talk about the general situation and going forward with Russia and Ukraine. So Russia's got their artillery online. They've got North Korea backing them up. They're building, a couple hundred tanks a month. They are drafting new reserves. The Russian generals feel like they essentially have a bottomless barrel of young Russian men that they can do these attacks with, and that they eventually will just overwhelm the Ukrainians, because no one's going to go into Ukraine and fight the Russians in Ukraine except Ukrainians. You know what I mean? Like, I don't give a fuck. I mean, I don't really understand all these foreign volunteers and stuff, but...
And from Russia's perspective, there's significant international concern about continuing to support Ukraine. I mean, look at the political situation in the U.S. There are serious discussions about whether we should continue providing the level of support that we have, and certainly an increased level of support. And from Russia's perspective, that's fantastic, right? They just have to wait out international support for Ukraine. Not saying that we will back out, but there's significant enough and realistic enough political discussions around not doing something that I feel like Russia would certainly take that as a positive sign.
Well, it all hinges on the election, the American election, because Trump will cut a deal with them, and then Biden will obviously keep fighting, or whoever the Democrat is will keep fighting. But then you also have...
I have much less faith in Trump that he's just going to cut a deal with them, but I have much less faith in the fact that Trump will be able to cut a deal and end this. I have very little faith in that.
He's going to end it. I mean, they're basically...
He may discontinue U.S. support, which could functionally end the conflict. But I do not see Trump getting in place and coming up with a measured and acceptable resolution to all parties. I think his solution for ending it, in my view, couldn't go too far beyond we're going to stop supporting Ukraine, and as a consequence, Russia wins, which to me is not a positive outcome for U.S. interests.
Yeah, but that's what he's going to do. He's going to be like he's going to play the peacemaker and be like, oh, I stopped the war. Biden started. I stopped it.
I can see that. All he wants to say he resolved it, even if that resolution is counter to U.S. interests.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. Yeah, and then the Congress is not going to give them money. Like, maybe they get some kind of border thing, but now that Trump doesn't want the border, it's like no one wants to do the Ukraine aid without the border. And then Trump doesn't want the border, so it's like, no, there's not going to be any more money for them to fight. Like, they're already conserving ammunition. You can tell that they're just going to run out of ammo, basically.
Yeah. I mean, again, certainly, as we said before, the DoD budget is enormous. There is money there that they can move around to do things, but not at the level that would be required to provide the kind of support Ukraine really needs. And I do think, I would continue to think that we are, for a relative steal, we are heavily treating one of our primary adversaries, global adversaries. We are causing internal turmoil for them. We are causing them to deplete their readiness and their resources. And we are in return not only getting that, we are also replenishing and modernizing the weapons and supplies that we have by providing old stuff to Ukraine. So you can argue around the edges of stuff, but I think at its core, that's what's happening here, and I think we're getting good value for our money out of this.
But we're throwing money at a losing. We're losing. Bad strategy, bad leaders in charge. We're throwing money at the problem. It's not working. Russia could win. I mean, the whole argument of we took Russia down a peg. If they win, they're in a better position than ever.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I believe they're in a better position than ever. If they win, they still have depleted tons of resources. They have still blown through money. They are still struggling on the global stage. They will still have internal conflict with dissent from citizens about this operation. I think there are a lot of negatives that are happening right now, spending through resources and depleting weapons and all of that. And I don't think they leave this in a better position. You could say geopolitically they feel stronger if they come in and they beat this, this tiny, but what is that word? They came in and they beat a tiny, poorly equipped neighbor. And they're going to sit on top of that as if that means that they are, well, I mean, it's not full backing of the U.S., right? But yes, they've gotten significant international aid. And the only reason they're where they are is because of the international aid. But I think sitting on top of that after, an extended conflict with a tiny neighbor on their border, that they eked out a victory despite huge losses at home in terms of public confidence and money. I wouldn't call that a win. I'm sure they'll try to sell it as a win.
If the Ukraine bends the knee, we're basically bending the knee. That's a win for them. He'll be more politically powerful than ever. He'll be the Russian czar who beat the West, and it'll just take him a little while longer. There'll be some new Russian young men, little babies come up. They'll draft all them up and they'll go invade another country, or, they'll start doing asymmetric operations. I mean, they've just been reasonably successful. I mean, it's sloppy, but they outlasted our political will.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, for most of this stuff for Russia ends up being internal political, driven by internal political concerns. So, Putin's actions have a lot less to do with caring a lot about Ukraine than it does caring what people think about Putin inside of Russia.
I get it. I'm just saying that we're not winning. And, we really shot ourselves in the foot by forcing the Ukrainians to follow this NATO strategy last year. And, it was a total flop. Our strategy flopped. We apparently don't know what we're doing. And I just think it's just been really bad. And if we end up winning, it's okay, we did a shitty job, but we pulled it out in the end. But if we lose, it's diminishes prestige. The Europeans are going to be afraid of Putin. They're not going to believe that we're going to back them up. It could be. I mean, it's NATO loses.
Yeah, I do think we need to continue providing support. Like I said, I think that we are getting good value for our money. But again, outside of that, the U.S. has taken on a role of kind of guaranteeing that we'll be present for safety and security in this stuff, and we have to stand behind that. I think the worst thing that could happen is that, like you say, our European allies and other allies around the world start to think the U.S. will not stand behind the guarantees we provide, and we will not help secure partners. That's how people start to. They lose confidence in us, and they start to back away. They make agreements with other parties. We become less central to the global discussions.
We're a sellout country. We sell people out left and right. We sold out the Afghans. We sold out the Kurds. We sell everyone out. You know what I mean? As soon as we don't need you anymore, you're done. Feed you to the wolves because some corporation doesn't want it or some politician doesn't care about you anymore. Yeah, to see it as, we'll sell Ukraine out. I mean, no one in DC cares about Ukraine. They just want to gain the political advantage from the situation and sell weapons and, gain more power or get the upper hand in some other argument or something. You don't give a fuck.
I think that exists, but I would push back a little bit on the idea that nobody actually cares. I do think people care. I really do think that there are tons of people in the government who do care, who are trying to do the right thing, who have actual moral positions on this stuff and feel strongly about it and do look at the loss of life and are concerned about it. That doesn't mean that there aren't people playing politics entirely and that there aren't people who absolutely do not care and for whom this is simply, a card that they're playing. But there are people who really care and are trying to get the right thing done because it's the right thing. It's wonderful when your concerns align with our global interests, and that's how you kind of accomplish something effective. But I think there's a bit more of that. I know you're skeptical of that, but to me, I think it's true. I think it's what I saw is people who do care, who do want to do the right thing, and they try as much as possible to get that to align with the global interests of the U.S. so that we can take actions that are for the best in every way.
Very pie in the sky of you. Love it. All right. So Biden and Gaza, right? Biden now doesn't want to bomb the shit out of Gaza. Now he says it's over the top, and he says that Bibi Netanyahu is a fucking bad guy. Netanyahu's toxic politically, internationally, and Biden is pushing for a pause. They're concerned about Israeli offensive into Rafah, which would be very aggressive. What do you think about Biden, his like flipper flopper thing?
So I think I would describe this a little bit less as a flip-flop. I would say that this is a changing public message. I think there was always, and anything you look at that seems to be based in kind of factual reporting, talks about how there was always extreme pressure on Israel to move more slowly, to back down, not to be so aggressive. There was private pressure, and publicly there was support. Right. And that public support was believed to be getting us the ability to speak like a friend in private. That strategy clearly was not effective. Israel was doing whatever they felt like doing and pressing forward. And I think this changing tactic just sort of, to me, it demonstrates that the strategy that was being used by the administration previously was not effective at controlling the situation. Perhaps they had some ability to influence what Israel was doing, and only the administration kind of knows it. And quite frankly, actually, only Israel really knows the degree to which the administration's strategy actually impacted their actions. But I think, to me, this says that the approach that the administration was taking, they do not feel was having the intended results. I think it's also responding to public pressure. I think you've got people on both sides of the aisle in the U.S. who are dissatisfied with the situation over there right now and the way that it's playing out. And as much as they and many people support, Israel, they do feel like what is happening now with the Palestinians is over the top, that it is too much. And I think, Biden vocalizing that is also in some degree a response to public pressure for him to say that stuff vocally, that it's not enough to say it privately to the Israelis, and it's not helping in the way that they want. So, you've got to be a little more publicly vocal with those opinions to try to influence something.
Do you think that Gaza, Israel is an important kind of like flashpoint going on right now? I mean, it's ongoing. It's important. Right?
I think for sure. I think it has huge ramifications. I don't know that it needs to, but it does have huge ramifications for politics in the Middle East, where we are heavily entrenched. I mean, we just talked about everything in Jordan, and these things are not unrelated, right? All this stuff is critically important. And so you have this country very close, to the major global shipping lane that everything moves through. And you're also seeing this conflict eke out and cause, problems there. This is definitely important support.
Right, so did you know that Joe Biden hung up on Benjamin Netanyahu and did not talk to him for 4 weeks during the middle of this? Is that successful leadership, do you think?
So I can't speak to whether that's successful or not. To me, talking is usually the right answer. To me, ongoing dialogue, even with people who you're having significant disagreements with, is usually the right answer. But I'm not sitting there in that room. I would struggle to kind of second guess. I don't know what leads to that. And I don't know what the intent was, what Biden thought he was accomplishing. I would also make it really clear that while I do think the president should be involved in this because of the critical importance to just to almost everything, as I discussed, just because Biden's not talking to Netanyahu doesn't mean the U.S. and Israel are not talking, right? And it does not mean that even at senior levels, decisions aren't being made and, coordination is not happening. And just like every other issue, I think the president should certainly be involved to some degree, but there is also a degree to which the president needs to back off and let somebody else have point on some things. And the president should be involved when he's helpful, just like running any organization. Be involved when you're helpful,
Okay, first off, the whole hang up, and I understand hanging up maybe, but you call as a tactic, you call back later that night or the next day or something. You don't hang up and then don't talk to him for 4 weeks. That is just what a cranky old man does. Someone who's not thinking strategically. That's like, I'm a frustrated person, and of course he's frustrated because his brain is addled. And so, he goes, it doesn't talk to the guy. all you're doing is giving Benjamin Netanyahu all he wants. You think he wants to talk to Joe Biden? You don't talk to him for 4 weeks. He's like, it's like a fucking vacation for him. He's like in, Gaza cities and Khan Yunis. He's like all over the place. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to talk to Biden. I mean, that's an easy day. So I don't fucking get it.
Netanyahu is certainly incentivized based on domestic politics to keep this going, right? I think the moment that this conflict ends, he may be in a world of political pain within Israel. So he's incentivized to keep this going. I don't disagree
Biden
with that.
got frustrated and stopped putting pressure on him.
Again, maybe they didn't talk on the phone. I would hesitate to say that means that they're not placing pressure on Netanyahu or on Israel simply because Joe Biden is not having a telephone conversation. The two of them are not having a telephone conversation. That doesn't mean there's no pressure. I would guess that the president probably viewed that as continuing the pressure campaign. I don't know that that's exactly the strategy I would take. I do think talking more is more effective. It's not as if the U.S. suddenly stopped talking to Israel because Biden hung up on Netanyahu, right?
But it's the performance of the president. These underlings, these State Department people don't fucking matter. It's this between these two men, and Biden's just dropping the ball because he just didn't call the guy for 4 weeks. Like, if you have a junior and a senior partner relationship, and it's like acrimonious at the point or whatever, like the senior partners will be like, oh, you're not getting away with this. This conversation's not over. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a parent and a child. And he's just like, fine, just do whatever you want. Like, he's just like throwing his hands up. And that's the wrong thing to do because he's just obviously has no control over the situation, no policy.
Again, I would characterize it a little bit differently, but only, you know what I mean? I think in terms of the like parent-child, it would be very different if a parent threw up their hands and said, well, do whatever you want, and walks out of the room and doesn't talk to their kid for, and I hate to give that analogy because Israel's not our child, but at the same time, like that, then if that parent also has an enormous support system with multiple agencies and, hundreds of thousands of people who are also engaged in these same discussions across multiple levels, like, so it's different. That doesn't exist for the parent. Suddenly there's literally no discussion if you don't talk to your child for 4 weeks. But if the president stops talking, two world leaders stop talking, you have a huge chain of people below them who continue those discussions. Like, yeah, but maybe that is another pressure point. Maybe that is a way of trying to continue pressure. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not sure that I agree that that's the most effective way. I think continuing to talk is important. And I think in the middle of such a critical conflict, it's important. It does seem like whatever we're doing, Israel's not listening to us, right? So what we were doing,
like agency to agency thing that's silly. This is between these two guys, and Netanyahu's he's like a teenager that's just like running off doing whatever he wants and stuff like that. And this idea that there's some independent countries bullshit. They're basically 51st state. We have military bases in their country. You know what I mean? We've given them all this money. They're back and forth from New York to Israel. Like, this is not a regular country relationship. And we get besmirched by whatever it is they decide to do because we get tied in with them. So it's like a totally different scenario, in my opinion. The discipline of a child or somebody who's like in a inferior relationship comes from like the point of like that parent or the person who has the upper hand. The only person that Benjamin Netanyahu has to listen to is the president of the United States, whoever that may be. And Joe Biden essentially got frustrated, relinquished that, and he delegated it to like all these, little bureaucrats and stuff. Like, what's that going to do? You think if Benjamin Netanyahu's not going to listen to Joe Biden on Gaza, he's not going to listen to the State Department assistant attaché for human rights, fairness, and stuff like.
Yeah, but I think that's a little bit reductive to pretend that you're talking about mid or low level bureaucrats when we discuss this, and that it's not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that it's not the Secretary of State, that it's not the U.S. ambassador to Israel, right? These are significant people. These are people, some of whom are in the cabinet. These are people who work directly for the president. So it's not as if you're leaving it to the guy who just got to the embassy in Israel 3 weeks ago to talk to Netanyahu. You still have someone who holds significant sway over actions there, right? And they don't have to talk to him. I think we both realize that when this stuff gets hashed out, when these decisions are made, when this planning happens, you don't have these two heads of state sitting down and making all of the decisions and detailing. They don't go on like a weekend retreat and put sticky notes up and make the entire plan themselves, right? Something is brought. There's a huge cadre of people who are doing most of the actual planning and operations, working together, getting stuff ironed out. And then those two people come together for the tough parts, right? And And you know what? I will say, if you're not making progress on those tough parts, maybe taking a pause is not the worst thing in the world. Again, I feel like continuing to talk in a situation like this is really important. There are a lot of lives on the line, and there's a lot of important aspects for U.S. global interests here. So I do think continuing to talk is probably a better strategy.
Yeah, but instead, our guys have to like put their heads together and, like two rams or something, like lock horns, and someone's got to push someone out of the way.
Our global interests, and that's how you kind of accomplish something effective. This is not unique to right now, though. I think we should remember that in the long arc of history, the U.S. has struggled tremendously, despite the fact that we should have huge influence over Israel's actions because of the level of support we provide to them. We tend not to. Israel tends to operate as they see fit, and they on the world stage they can do that. But I think we would probably both agree you would expect us to have more influence over Israel than we do, based on their dependence on U.S. funds and U.S. weapons and U.S. assistance, quite frankly, on the global stage. I do feel like what is happening now with the Palestinians is over the top, that it is too much. And I think Biden vocalizing that is also in some degree a response to public pressure for him to say that stuff vocally, that it's not enough to say it privately to the Israelis, and it's not helping in the way that they want. So, you've got to be a little more publicly vocal with those opinions to try to influence something.
Do you think that Gaza Israel's an important kind of like flashpoint going on right now? I mean, it's ongoing. It's important. Right?
I think for sure. I think it has huge ramifications. I don't know that it needs to, but it does have huge ramifications for politics in the Middle East, where we are heavily entrenched. I mean, we just talked about everything in Jordan, and these things are not unrelated, right? All this stuff is critically important. And so you have this country very close, to the major global shipping lane that everything moves through. And you're also seeing this conflict eke out and cause, problems there. This is definitely important.
All right. So did you know that Joe Biden hung up on Benjamin Netanyahu and did not talk to him for 4 weeks during the middle of this? Is that successful leadership, do you think?
So I can't speak to whether that's successful or not. To me, talking is usually the right answer. To me, ongoing dialogue, even with people who you're having significant disagreements with, is usually the right answer. But I'm not sitting there in that room. I would struggle to kind of second guess. I don't know what leads to that, and I don't know what the intent was, what Biden thought he was accomplishing. I would also make it really clear that while I do think the president should be involved in this because of the critical importance to just to almost everything, as I discussed, just because Biden's not talking to Netanyahu doesn't mean the U.S. and Israel are not talking, right? And it does not mean that even at senior levels, decisions aren't being made and coordination is not happening. And just like every other issue, I think the president should certainly be involved to some degree, but there is also a degree to which the president needs to back off and let somebody else have point on some things. And the president should be involved when he's helpful. Just like running any organization, be involved when you're helpful,
Okay, first off, the whole hang up, and I understand hanging up maybe, but you call as a tactic, you call back later that night or the next day or something. You don't hang up and then don't talk to him for 4 weeks. That is just what a cranky old man does. Someone who's not thinking strategically. That's like, I'm a frustrated person, and of course he's frustrated because his brain is addled. And so, he goes, it doesn't talk to the guy. All you're doing is giving Benjamin Netanyahu all he wants. You think he wants to talk to Joe Biden? You don't talk to him for 4 weeks. He's it's like a fucking vacation for him. He's like in, Gaza cities and Khan Yunis. He's like all over the place. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to talk to Biden. I mean, that's an easy day. So I don't fucking get it.
Netanyahu is certainly incentivized based on domestic politics to keep this going, right? I think the moment that this conflict ends, he may be in a world of political pain within Israel. So he's incentivized to keep this going. I don't disagree with that.
Biden got frustrated and stopped putting pressure on him.
Again, maybe they didn't talk on the phone. I would hesitate to say that means that they're not placing pressure on Netanyahu or on Israel simply because Joe Biden is not having a telephone conversation. The two of them are not having a telephone conversation. That doesn't mean there's no pressure. I would guess that the president probably viewed that as continuing the pressure campaign. I don't know that that's exactly the strategy I would take. I do think talking more is more effective. It's not as if the U.S. suddenly stops talking to Israel because Biden hung up on Netanyahu, right?
But it's the performance of the president. These underlings, these State Department people don't fucking matter. It's this between these two men, and Biden's just dropping the ball because he just didn't call the guy for 4 weeks. Like if you have a junior and a senior partner relationship, and it's like acrimonious at the point or whatever, like the senior partners will be like, oh, you're not getting away with this. This conversation's not over. You know what I mean? Like it's like a parent and a child. And he's just like, fine, just do whatever you want. Like he's just like throwing his hands up. And that's the wrong thing to do because he's just obviously has no control over the situation, no policy.
Again, I would characterize it a little bit differently, but only, you know what I mean? I think in terms of the like parent-child, it would be very different if a parent threw up their hands and said, well, do whatever you want, and walks out of the room and doesn't talk to their kid for, and I hate to give that analogy because Israel's not our child, but at the same time, like that, then if that parent also has an enormous support system with multiple agencies and, you know, hundreds of thousands of people who are also engaged in these same discussions across multiple levels, like, so it's different. That doesn't exist for the parent. Suddenly there's literally no discussion if you don't talk to your child for 4 weeks. But if the president stops talking, two world leaders stop talking, you have a huge chain of people below them who continue those discussions. Like, yeah, but maybe that is another pressure point. Maybe that is a way of trying to continue pressure. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not sure that I agree that that's the most effective way. I think continuing to talk is important. And I think in the middle of such a critical conflict, it's important. It does seem like whatever we're doing, Israel's not listening to us, right? So what we were doing,
like agency to agency thing that's silly. You know, this is between these two guys, and Netanyahu's he's like a teenager that's just like running off doing whatever he wants and stuff like that. And this idea that there's some independent countries bullshit. They're basically 51st state. We have military bases in their country. You know what I mean? We've given them all this money. They're back and forth from New York to Israel. Like this is not a regular country relationship. And we get besmirched by whatever it is they decide to do because we get tied in with them. So it's like a totally different scenario, in my opinion. The discipline of a child or somebody who's like in a inferior relationship comes from like the point of like that parent or the person who has the upper hand. The only person that Benjamin Netanyahu has to listen to is the president of the United States, whoever that may be. And Joe Biden essentially got frustrated, relinquished that, and yeah, he delegated it to like all these, you know, little bureaucrats and stuff. Like, what's that going to do? You think if Benjamin Netanyahu's not going to listen to Joe Biden on Gaza, he's not going to listen to the State Department assistant attaché for human rights, fairness, and stuff like.
Yeah, but I think that's a little bit reductive to pretend that you're talking about mid or low level bureaucrats when we discuss this, and that it's not, you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that it's not the Secretary of State, that it's not the U.S. ambassador to Israel, right? These are significant people. These are people, some of whom are in the cabinet. These are people who work directly for the president. So it's not as if you're leaving it to, you know, the guy who just got to the embassy in Israel 3 weeks ago to talk to Netanyahu. You still have someone who has holds significant sway over actions there, right? And they don't have to talk to him. I think we both realize that when this stuff gets hashed out, when these decisions are made, when this planning happens, you don't have these two heads of state sitting down and making all of the decisions and detailing. They don't go on like a weekend retreat and put sticky notes up and make the entire plan themselves, right? Something is brought. There's a huge cadre of people who are doing most of the actual planning and operations, working together, getting stuff ironed out. And then those two people come together for the tough parts, right? And you know what? I will say, if you're not making progress on those tough parts, maybe taking a pause is not the worst thing in the world. Again, I feel like continuing to talk in a situation like this is really important. There are a lot of lives on the line, and there's a lot of important aspects for U.S. global interests here. So I do think continuing to talk is probably a better strategy.
Yeah, but it's an arm guys have to like put their heads together and, you know, like two rams or something, like lock horns, and someone's got to push someone out of the way, you know? But I mean, Joe Biden being like, tapping out is bullshit.
This is not unique to right now, though. I think we should remember that in the long arc of history, the U.S. has struggled tremendously, despite the fact that we should have huge influence over Israel's actions because of the level of support we provide to them. We tend not to. Israel tends to operate as they see fit, and they on the world stage they can do that. But I think we would probably both agree you would expect us to have more influence over Israel than we do, based on their dependence on, you know, U.S. funds and U.S. Weapons and U.S. assistance, quite frankly, on the global stage.
You ready to talk about DoD Cloud?
Sure.
There's this JWCC.
Right.
I don't know if it has like a cool whatever, but this Joint Warfighter Cloud capability, $9 billion program that allows the services to choose what cloud they want, whether it's Google, Amazon, Microsoft, whatever, so that those companies can go in and hire officers and like snake contracts and whatever, because this came after the failed like JEDI contract vehicle, which was supposed to basically go to all one vendor. And the government wanted AWS because they have the best tech, but Microsoft protested because like the federal government, the military is like Microsoft's turf. You know what I mean? Like they milk so much goddamn money that like they will fight that. And then somehow they pulled some strings with their officer lobbyist dicks and it got reversed. And so then they changed it back to Microsoft, and then Amazon sued, and then they got it back, and then they sued back. And then this cloud contract was locked up for years. And if you're wondering why I care about cloud, it's because you need cloud to do AI. And these people in charge of this are program dicks. And they've been messing this up for years and years and years. They're still messing it up. We'll talk about quantum. They're messing that up. They obviously, I saw firsthand the AI stuff. They say nothing in the department meets the requirement, which is a definitive way of saying this cloud capability is not up and running yet. You know, it might be available, but the services don't know how to use it. There's all this space where like nobody knows what to do. They're saying they need it for JADC2, which is now called CJADC2.
I think in the grand scheme of things, yes, a broader offering makes sense. I think you run into these problems. The DoD is an enormous organization. Government is enormous. Most of these agencies are enormous. And then you run into problems when an agency tries to sort of push a single solution. What you want to do is have this centralized capability to provide the capabilities that are needed by folks out in the field, folks at lower levels across the organization. And the more specific you try to be in the offerings that you provide, the less likely you are to meet everybody's requirements for their individual missions. So yeah, having something that provides broader capabilities across a variety of platforms is important. And right now, I think it sounds like you agree with me. There's almost nothing more important than cloud computing for modernizing. I'm not sure that they're doing it well. That doesn't necessarily come through, but I think they're trying, and maybe they're doing it better than they've done in the past. I also think it's a little concerning to me that it just doesn't feel like they are as focused on security in this as I might like to see. If the DoD is providing next generation cloud services across the entire enterprise, I would sort of expect that security would be an integral part of this from the ground up. And while it sounds like it's there, it sounds like it's a little bit more reliant on just sort of like
vendors.
With going with the vendors and ensuring that they are simply providing security that is compliant with existing regulations. I would like to see for the sort of next generation of military networking that you are really innovating and building in security from the ground up. And I'm not involved in this, so I can't say that they're not doing that, but nothing I've seen makes me feel like that's what they're doing. And if that's true, then I find that a little bit troubling.
So they're saying that the department is trying to implement baseline zero trust by 2027. What do you think about that?
I think from a government perspective, it sounds like a fantastic idea with an aggressive timeline, but I think from a realistic perspective, it is way too long. And you know what I mean? Now you're putting in place something that you should have been doing for at least 5 years, and you're still not looking at doing it for 3 or 4 more years. And we probably all realize that you're going to miss that deadline as well. It does not smack of like a focus on security and provide me with the level of confidence that I would like to for something that they are touting as so integral to the future operations.
Well, if you're saying by 2027, that means at least December 31st of 2027, and it's the beginning of 24 right now. So you're really looking at like almost 4 years before
for technology that they should already, a technology that should be in place today. If I'm being candid, right, from a security perspective, that's what they should already be doing. And they're saying that they might do it in 4 years. And I think both of us probably realize that when they say 2027, like you said, not only does that mean December 31st, 2027, that probably means that that's a deadline that's going to slip. Usually that kind of stuff. This is an aggressive project, and usually those don't get done on time or on budget.
So John Mithun, director of Neptune Cloud Management Office, portfolio manager, told Breaking Defense that JWCC is available for all offerings for any new cloud computing capability and services at the secret, impact level 6, or top secret, including all tactical edge and OCONUS cloud computing capabilities and services, which I mean, availability, I mean, that's nice. It's not being used, probably, I would assume. I mean, I don't know. I just saw a bunch of like, I didn't see a lot of happy talk in this, but I just saw this like bare bones, like we want to do this, we're evaluating, we don't really know, this is going to be big in the future. That's kind of bullshit. Like, many people that are like grab things like a pit bull and are just like rip it apart and like deliver this stuff, but everybody wants to timeline everything out, and it's not even a money thing. It's just people are slow. These organizations are too big and bloated. It's not going to work.
I think that's true, and I think what you consistently want to do is avoid like shadow IT, right? This is an effort to provide people with the capabilities that they need, so that they're not going out and doing these individual procurements that don't have any centralized control. Not only is it more expensive, it's a little bit more risky, and you can't see it, so you don't have a good inventory. I mean, the concept is great. I don't have enough information to say whether the execution is great, but it sounds like they're struggling with it to me. It stinks of the kind of project that the DoD and really most of the government does poorly. So it would take a lot of stuff lining up for this to go well. And so the fact that it feels like I'm not seeing that shine through in reporting makes me believe that my suspicions are right, that they are struggling with this.
It's all part of the rub. So China has got the economic problems. There's clickbait. Is China going to collapse? This and that. There's always that stuff. But it actually seems really serious now, where they're censoring false narratives about their economy. They've restricted short selling, as if this long-term slide in their economy is due to short sellers, and like they're blaming it on short sellers. But they've got serious problems, obviously, with the real estate. Their stock market's down roughly 20%. Deflation that they cannot really get a handle on, and then youth unemployment that some people are thinking could be at 50%. This was reported on by the New York Times, and Xi Jinping and these powers that be there, I believe what happened here is that they followed through on what they said they were going to do, which is they used offshore bank accounts to buy Chinese stocks and artificially boost the stock price on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, stuff like that, in order to reinstill confidence of foreign investors, bring more foreign money back in, because they really need foreign money, because they've essentially spent too much of their money, they've borrowed too much money, and they haven't really been able to balance their books or plan their economy very well. If it grew fast, but it's almost like they have a cancer in their economy. So what do you think?
I mean, I think this does sound like standard China to me, right? Trying to control the narrative, just like we talked about in Russia. And a little bit in Israel. Domestic politics are really important. Public confidence internally is really important, just to the stability of the government. So I think that is part of the driving factor here. I agree with you that the external investment is a critical component of this, and they want international confidence in the Chinese economy so they can continue to get domestic investment. That said, I mean, businesses are going to operate in China, right? I mean, it's a huge market. They're going to be there. A lot of these businesses aren't going to just go pulling out, but I do think that's one piece of it. I think a bigger piece is the concern about internal stability and shaping and controlling the narrative for Chinese citizens. And that's pretty standard Chinese practice, right? They heavily shape the information environment within the country. They control the narrative, and they do their best to ensure that the average Chinese citizen only knows what the government wants them to be aware of. I think while, I think you believe a little more than I do that the U.S. government engages in that. I feel very strongly, I think it's quite obvious that China engages in it beyond anything.
Do you believe the economic numbers from the Department of Labor?
I think for the most part, yeah, we have generally accurate. I mean, nothing is absolutely perfect, but I do think that the U.S. government puts out accurate numbers based on the underlying data. I do not think that China consistently puts out accurate numbers based on the underlying data. I think there's a big difference there, right? I'm not saying that the U.S. government wouldn't use. I would never say that nobody's going to use the numbers that exist in a way to spin it in a way that is most advantageous for the message that they want to send. But I mean, everybody does that everywhere, right? Uses numbers in their own way. But I do think the underlying data supports the information being put out by the U.S. government, and the underlying data does not support the information being put out by the Chinese government. Those are two distinct differences. Though, again, I will also say China taking actions to actually stabilize their economy or stabilize their market, whatever they're doing. I wouldn't say that's wrong. Maybe I don't like the way they're going about it, but that you want the government to step in and try to stabilize the economy when it's struggling. That is part of the role of government, or arguably, I guess somebody could make an argument against that and non-interventionist, but I think that's part of the role of government. So I think it should be heartening that China is trying to do something. I don't like that a component of that is probably out and out lies and censoring information so people can't talk about the problems. I don't think that's a solution, but I do think the government engaging in actions to stabilize the economy is broadly is a good action. Is good.
China's not engaging in actions to stabilize the economy. They've robbed the country blind for decades, and they've spent too much money. They didn't know what they were doing, even though they came to our graduate schools to learn how to actually do things. And they fucked their country up. I know you said about America. I don't believe the numbers from here. I think that they will massage the numbers. However, they are able to, not outright lies, like you said, but they will massage the numbers to suit whoever the president is at that time because they work for him and that, it's under their control. So I don't really believe our numbers either. I also think that if there are bad economic numbers coming out of the United States through this Labor Department and stuff, when you and I watch it on the news, every rich person out there and every stock investor and everything already has that shit. So there's a information imbalance in our country where it might not be exactly the same as in China where it's like they can fully control information. There's a manipulation and a controlling of information in the United States that is not healthy or fair and benefits rich people and people in power. Now, what they did over there is they've been using real estate as the engine of their growth, which that will not be the case in the future. With housing starts down 60% compared to pre-pandemic. And the analysts are saying that their housing market crash is like 2008 on steroids because they have triple the debt or triple the leverage. I mean, the debt might be variable, but they're essentially more vulnerable than we were when we got hit really hard in 2008. We all remember how bad that was. Plus, they've never had a recession before. 25% of the GDP is tied up in housing and real estate, and 70% of Chinese household income is tied up in real estate. And so the real estate prices are going to crash. These investment homes, these companies are liquidating, people are going to lose money. And yeah, it could be unstable.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is not something that we're immune from either. Nobody's immune. I mean, global economies struggle. Yes, I agree with you. China is in a uniquely bad position. And I think China has, as you said, kind of like people at the top have robbed the economy for their own personal gain and to stay in power by supporting programs that maybe don't make financial sense for them as a country. I think they are in more trouble than we were in. And like you said, if they're highly over leveraged, that presents problems. But nobody's immune to it. And I guess, I don't know, the role of government at this point there is not to suppress information, but to try to take actions that will actually support economic stability. Listen, people should be able to say, this is a U.S., my U.S. perspective. People should be able to speak. People should have freedom of speech and be able to, voice their opinions, just like we are right here, being critical of the Chinese government if they're in China. But the role of the government is not to shut that down so it seems like everything's fine. The role of government is to step in and take actions that actually stabilize the economy, that actually fix the problems that they're having, or at least try to, so the average people can move forward, not just not thinking there's anything wrong, but like with, problems actually being solved.
In both countries, the people in charge aren't intervening in the economy in order to help the middle class or the lower class or the poor or anything. They're just doing it to perpetuate the economic system as it is in order to just keep the seesaw teetering, not getting out of balance, so that from their perch of power or their perch of wealth, that they can continue extracting as much as they can out of the government, business, investments, insider information, like whatever it is that they've got their fingers into. That's why they stabilize. They're not stabilizing the economy in China or in the United States because a single mother is about to get evicted from her apartment or a family business in Ohio is closing down after 3 generations or something. I mean, like, they don't care about that shit. All they care about is they don't want people in the streets, hoisting them up from the lampposts.
Again, I think we're going to disagree on the intentions of people in power in the United States. While I agree with you, people certainly want to protect their own interests, and I agree with you that there are some people who are very cynical in the way that they operate. I also believe there are a lot of people there who truly want to do the right thing. I believe you do have a bunch of people in power, people who I've met, who I know. They do care about that small business owner in Ohio. They do think that that's a driving force behind the economy and that it's a net good. And they do want to protect that stuff and create programs and capabilities that will foster an environment where that stuff is successful. And because it's the right thing to do, and because it's good for the economy, and because it's good for them too. I mean, all of that stuff is true. I think you're, as usual, a little bit more cynical than me about the motivations of people in power. I will not for a second say that those people don't exist, the people you're describing, but I don't think that it's, the kind of overwhelming majority and the driving force of everything that happens is some kind of like broad conspiracy to continue extracting wealth at the expense of everyone else and give them just enough to get by. I know that there's a sort of prevailing narrative in some circles that that's true. I simply don't believe it.
Okay. All right. Quantum computing is interesting. And there was actually an interesting report from this Mitchell Institute, which I've never heard of, from a confidence pilot female woman, Heather Lucky Penny, who is now a national security analyst and has written this report on how DoD is not executing on quantum, which I thought that they were going to be able to do. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Just spend the fucking money and like get this stuff up before the Chinese do. I think we actually probably are ahead on them on the civilian side of things. I didn't know that in DoD it's this bad and that they just like don't know what to do. They're just twiddling their thumbs, basically, is what she's saying. And she says that their quantum approach needs a urgent and massive reevaluation. DoD is struggling to integrate quantum. And the real problem here is that DoD relies on private sector companies are driving innovations that usually have a civilian application, like GPS or something like a civilian application, and then the military buys it. But there are few civilian applications for quantum technology. It's kind of like nuclear bomb. You know what I mean? It's like regular people don't really need a nuclear bomb. They don't really need a quantum computer. They don't need a helicopter, military type helicopter, whatever. And so we do get quantum research and stuff happening in DARPA and in some of these other places. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. It's called the Valley of Death, where it's like you have DARPA doing advanced research. We spend a lot of money there. They come up with an idea for some new weapon system or some new technology. And then you have like the 82nd Airborne, and there's nothing in between. So it's like, unless DARPA is going to like walk the shit over to the 82nd Airborne and like put it on the guys' heads or whatever, like that's not going to happen. There's just no one there to like bridge that gap. And so that's where we're at, right? They're saying that DIU, AFWorks, and SpaceWorks, which I just heard of, have all basically not been able to bridge this gap. And it's like, really, what are these places doing? I mean, they're just there so that the generals can point to something and be like, well, I got this place down in Florida, and that's where all our innovation's going down. And that's our innovation shop. I'm an innovator. And it's like, that's not how this works. And they really are just in the totally wrong track. And I don't understand why we have these organizations. They haven't made any progress on DARPA Valley of Death. And it's causing us to fall behind these technologies. China doesn't have these problems. They have other problems, like we said. But what do you think about?
First thing is, I do think China has problems here as well, right? I think it seems like they're throwing more money at the problem, and it seems like they may be ahead in some areas, but it also seems like we're ahead in some areas too. I'm not sure if it's to the degree to which it's related, but I think we have a really different dynamic of different operational dynamic that we used to in terms of research in these cutting edge things. It used to be that the government took the lead role in all of this stuff, right? The government was really the primary actor. How do we have the internet? Because the government invented this communication system that turned into the internet. We come up, why do we have so many technologies out of the space program? Like, these things come because the government does the tough, heavy lifting, the things that maybe don't make the most financial sense for the private sector to be doing. The government fully supports that stuff, drives it forward, gets it to the place we need it, and then you release this technology out into the world, and then you get the public sector, innovating around the specific technologies. You get it used for all kinds of stuff, both defense and just down, space to making mattresses, right? A little bit of everything. And that doesn't seem to be the way that we operate anymore. We are heavily dependent on the private sector to do a lot of this stuff. It needs to be profit driven. The degree to which, the USG has the ability to kind of direct the research here is not entirely clear. And obviously this is falling short. So I feel like there could be something related to the fact that we've taken a step back from that super active role that we used to play in a lot of this stuff. And we're a little bit more passive, working with industry and trying to incentivize things with programs and contracts. And I'm not sure that that's the right approach. We may need to be more active. This stuff is important. This is a technology that is critically important to the future and to our future ability to maintain our position globally, right? This has applications across the board. And like you said, it's not being integrated the things that we can do at this point are not being effectively integrated, not being tested out in the way that they should. And it sounds to me like the stuff they want to do at this point it's super, super basic stuff, right? We're not talking about anything, granted, quantum is not basic in and of itself, but like the capabilities related to quantum that they want to be testing out are basic capabilities in that space, right? It's not like they've got something, insane.
They're not doing anything now. I mean, DARPA's doing stuff like, Valley of Death. There's nothing. Like, there's just, DARPA will like do some research and then it's like, boo, like into the void. And it's ridiculous. Talk about China on quantum. They have twice as many patents as the United States, but they do this a lot. They like to have the numbers jacked up, so they do a bunch of bullshit patents. They do the same with the research papers and with other stuff.
It could be a problem, but it's not necessarily reflective of actual capabilities, right? A patent it's not a one for one that means they have some outsized capability beyond ours.
Yeah, but I mean, it shows that they want it, like they're hungry for it. So they're saying China's got an all of the above strategy, which means they'll just fund any quantum possibility here. Whereas, and they're going for two that essentially the American quantum government geniuses think are not possible or not a good way to do things from a military standpoint. So they're trying to allocate resources carefully, although we're in a zero-sum game with China. So like this careful allocation of resources doesn't make sense. We need to be investing in all of this technology because we can't outspend them. And we can see that they can't handle we should be putting pressure on them like the Soviet Union when missile defense bankrupt the Soviet Union. And these two things are quantum key distribution and quantum radar, also quantum sensors, which the idea basically is that you can develop a quantum radar that can detect stealth, it defeats stealth aircraft. And basically everyone has stealth aircraft now. And then quantum sensors also could, detect stealth aircraft or missile launches, stuff like that. Quantum key distribution would be more for cryptography and kind of trying to protect themselves against, being hacked by, the NSA and the CIA. I mean, we've hacked China's, all their computers and everything like that. Obviously they hack into our stuff, but like, we've hacked everything they got, I'm sure. So they're obviously pretty paranoid about that. So they think quantum key distribution. Our smart guys don't think quantum key distribution is going to work very well, but it's like, what if they're wrong? I mean, this kind of stuff happens all the time. And, like these car companies didn't think the kind of stuff Elon Musk wanted to do on cars was going to work, but he showed them and they were wrong. So it's like maybe there's a Chinese Elon Musk over there, and I've seen the picture online of him. He might be able to figure it out, whereas we can't. And then they've got quantum key distribution and we don't, or they've got quantum radar and we don't, and we're not pursuing this stuff. And it's like, honestly, like for some of this important military application technologies, like even if it's not entirely feasible, we should still be doing it. I mean, it's research and it might yield something else, or it might like advance later, combine with some other technology later. Like we're in the fight of our lives. And we just got to go for it. So, yeah,
I tend to agree with you. I think we need to be going for it. I think it's easy to try to shape the narrative and say, well, China's not investing properly. They're wasting money on things that aren't going to turn out. But I don't think we know how any of this is going to turn out right now. Right. And sure, there are some smart folks who probably have ideas of where the smartest investments are in this space. But it's complicated and we don't truly understand it all yet. And we have not had a lot of success. So I do think investigating almost everything does make sense. And I do think, again, this is a critical technology for the future, right? Controlling this, being able to do it and coming up with this is critical. This is the future. And where else are we spending? We talked about money a bunch of times in DoD budgets and finding the resources to do things. We have by far the largest military spending in the world, well outpacing China. So there's money there, right? What are we spending it on? Are we spending it properly? If we're not preparing ourselves if we're not protecting people in the Middle East and we're not preparing ourselves, for the technology of the future, what are we doing with this money?
It's being stolen. Much of it. It's being put in people's pockets, circuitously through different subcontractors and everything. And it's just, there's a whole class of people all over DC, Virginia, and all over the country too, to a lesser degree. And they just make money off of it. And there's like a 20, 30% markup on everything, and everything slows down and it takes longer. And people get rich on it, whether the economy is good or bad or whatever. And that's why our military costs so much. And they tell us it's most powerful in the world. So you think, oh, we're getting that for our money. But, it's really this, the warriors in any society have always taken the choicest resources. Think back in caveman times, who's going to get the best cuts of meat? Who's going to get the nicest hut? or the best horse or whatever. It's going to be the strongest guy. You know what I mean? Like,
so I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong for people to be making money on this. I think we can probably look back in history. We can look at things like like moonshot, getting to the moon. I'm sure a lot of people made a lot of money on that, but we also did something very difficult. We also accomplished a big task. And I think the problem we're having here is we're not getting, as you say, right? We're not getting what we're paying for. And I have no problems with people making we're in a capitalist society.
Compare the moonshot to Afghanistan, Chuck.
The way we incentivize people in the United States in our capitalist economy is with money, right? That is the thing that we do. But what we need to do is be incentivizing them to deliver on the results that we actually need, right? This stuff needs to be happening. And if we accomplish that by incentivizing through money, I don't have a problem with it. But you've got to get the results out of it, or it's all for naught.
But the system, the people in the system have perverted the system in order to milk it. Like, you go back to like moonshot, like in decades past, it's like, yeah, there was largesse in the military industrial complex, but it's had generations. It's like a cancer, also like a cancer, where it's just sucking up more and more and more. There's just more consultants, more environmental policy, whatever assistance, and just like way too much. And it just slows everything down. And we have to pay all this extra money, and it's bankrupting our country. And they've just figured out that the military and the national defense and the government is just ripe for this, because it's like a no-fail mission. Like, we have to have this stuff. And then, they find ways to give money to the politicians. The politicians keep the faucet on, and just everybody just quietly lets the money just like flow out, and yeah, little contractors like here or there or whatever, make a little salary or whatever. But these people that own these companies are making way more, and they don't do shit, and they're not that smart.
Sure. I mean, we need to come up with a way to incentivize the right things and get the results we need, right? I have no problem if the person who is able to develop the quantum capabilities that the U.S. needs to remain in the same place on the global stage. I have no problem with him becoming fantastically wealthy in the process. I don't have an issue with that, but I do think we need to deliver on the capabilities we need. And right now, people are getting fantastically wealthy and not delivering, and that's the core of the problem. And I do agree that we should solve this stuff. We should fix it, right? And a lot of it is the government is doing this kind of research. The government plans this stuff out, and then somebody becomes fantastically wealthy because they come up with a private sector application for this technology, right? And that's where the real wealth comes in. It's not being milked out of the process of simply developing it, right? You come up with this, you are working with government money to develop this capability, and then the government gets it to use, and you can go off and use it in the private sector and develop new applications that will deliver huge value to you. And I think that's a system that's worked for us in the past.
It's not that cut and dry, though. I mean, come on.
Oh, I'm not suggesting it's cut and dry, for sure.
All right. And so the FBI dismantled a Chinese infrastructure botnet and issued a public cybersecurity warning also to all the Five Eyes countries, all the Anglo countries. They are saying that these Chinese hackers have been in critical infrastructure for up to 5 years. This is not espionage, because, when you want espionage, you hack into the State Department or wherever. You don't hack into like the water treatment plant. You know what I mean? Like, this is obviously cyber attacks that were meant to lay the groundwork for interfering with our critical infrastructure if they got mad at us or something like that. Now, I will say, we probably have the same shit on all theirs. Okay. I mean, we probably hacked into all their dams and all their power stations or whatever. So, I'm sure it goes both ways. But the FBI is doing something about this. There was a botnet they shut down that was based around old office and home routers that were outdated, that people weren't taking care of. And so the Chinese were using these as botnet, and they've been targeting water treatment, electrical, transportation, pipelines, with attacks that are increasingly sophisticated. FBI shut them down, but they're probably still out there.
I think this is not a surprise, right? And obviously, it's interesting to see this being released publicly to this degree, because I think you've seen talking around the edges of this problem for a long time. Little smaller advisories about more specific problems, advisories talking about the need to protect things like this, the need to protect critical infrastructure. That's been a common theme in advisories for many years, that critical infrastructure was important and it was something we needed to be concerned about, and that adversaries were interested in providing more generalized recommendations, sort of less specific. Though, occasionally there's been sort of specific reporting out. I think this is one that is quite significant in the scope of things, and I think it shows the fact that it's coming out to me says that and that it's authored by so many partners. You've got the entire Five Eyes community involved, and multiple agencies, six federal agencies. All engaged in the dissemination of this information. So to me, it just says that there was a concerted effort across the board and probably some generally broad agreement that this is a significant enough issue that it needs to be, people need to be screaming from the rooftops about it so that everybody notices. And they're very clear in building protection. And it says to me that it is probably the belief, this is my own conjecture, but it says to me that there's probably a belief across those organizations that not enough is being done to secure these capabilities, both in the US and globally. And so they felt like they needed to release something very specific to demonstrate that people are sitting there, the Chinese are sitting there, they're waiting, they're ready, this is real, pay attention. And that they needed to do it very publicly as opposed to simply doing it within like the energy sector, like an ISAC, right? They could have pulled in people from the energy sector and talked about it quietly. And if this is coming out, I can't imagine for a moment that hasn't happened. So yeah, to me, it says there's real concern about it, and probably justifiably so. But it doesn't feel that different from the things we've been talking about on the periphery for a long time.
So last topic was talking about the new poll that came out about Gen Z's attitudes about the military, where they're saying that half of all of the adults under 30 have a negative view of the military. Half would never consider joining the military, whereas 20 years ago, that was only 25%. Kind of like the hippie types. Only 43% of Gen Z, or people under 30, not even Gen Z, have a positive view of the military. 30 to 49-year-olds, which includes us, have 57% positive of the military. We went through 9/11, I assume. Gen Z, low trust in institutions. So what do you think about Gen Z?
I'm not going to put the blame. I think this is troubling. Let's start there. I think it's troubling for our ability to operate effectively in the future if we can't get recruits, and you're not going to get among the best and the brightest. What you want is you're going to get a smattering of society. And a lot of what you need for the military is not the best and the brightest, but you need some of the best and the brightest to get involved in order to be successful. Sometimes there might be an inclination to blame, Gen Z, for instance. I'm not going to blame the people who have an opinion, right? They have an opinion for a reason. It's because of what's being presented to them. The problem is what's being presented to them. The problem is that the government, that the DoD is not shaping public perception of itself and maybe not doing a good enough job at what they're doing. You look at Gen Z, and Gen Z probably has no memories other than constant active wars. They don't remember 9/11, but they only remember us being engaged in a constant overseas wars for their entire lives. I think they probably don't see what we're getting out of those things, and one could make the argument in that case probably justifiably skeptical and maybe don't want to participate in that. We need to do a better job. If we're going to participate in things, we need to make it clear why it matters, what U.S. strategic interests it's helping. And we talked earlier about needing to actually protect people on the ground. Like, you've got to believe that you're going to go into this, you're going to do the right thing for an organization that's doing the right thing, that is going to try to protect you and is advancing U.S. interests. I find a lot of value in that. I think in my career, most of my career has been with the U.S. government, military and civilian. And I think I've provided support to really important programs that have helped advance U.S. interests globally. And I'm proud of that. It makes me feel good. I wouldn't want to be involved if I didn't feel that way. And I think, it's on the organization to make it clear to the people who they're trying to attract that is what they're getting out of this. It's not on the people to just sort of suck it up. I think there's, especially if you get into the sort of boomer generation or even older than that, there's this like inclination to say, well, suck it up. This is the right thing. You just got to believe it. We're telling you this is the right thing to do. Rah, rah, whatever. And I don't think that's the right answer. I think you got to make the case. People are right to be skeptical, and they should be treated as if their opinions are valid, and just try to shape that.
Well, they're not skeptical. They're refusing to join. In fact, they never consider it. It's off the table because of how bad a job the generals have done. Afghanistan, Kabul, now Tower 22, Righteous Strike. I mean, all these things tarnish the brand of the military, the lies, the scandals, the sexual assault stuff that's not fixed. And, the barracks are shitty, people getting poisoned through the water, the burn pits. They see these ads on TV. Obviously, there's stigma of like the PTSD and all that, even though a lot of jobs you're not really going to get that. But there's no action taken to make the military better, to actually fix the problems that are why the people don't want to come in. Also, the extremely low pay, which is they don't pay them enough. But they're saying the department is developing a comprehensive broad messaging campaign, propaganda, to help educate both today's youth, because we really need those youth, get them when they don't really they haven't formed any hard opinions here yet, and their influencers. So we're going to use the influencers. What young influencer is going to encourage young people to join the military. You're going to lose your following in a second because they have a negative view of the military. On the countless opportunities in the military, would you describe the military as boundless opportunity? I mean, I have like the opportunity to make sure your fucking room is clean every day, and that you're at work at 05 in the morning every fucking day, and that you're walking around in like negative degree, like doing your PT test and shit. Yeah, that's all those opportunities await you. You know,
I know I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I think there are huge opportunities available in the military for people coming from certain backgrounds and with certain skill sets. I think there are opportunities up and down the military. I do agree with that. I think somebody who wants to break into, if you have an interest in doing intel work, the way to break into that most effectively is you join the military. You get training, you get a skill set, you get experience, you get a clearance, you get out and you're doing that. And you can do really interesting work if that's something that interests you. I think if you're coming from a background and you don't feel like you have real opportunity, maybe being an auto mechanic is something that's super attractive to you. Getting in the military, becoming an auto mechanic, getting out, and then operating in that you've got training, you've got capabilities, you either start your own business or get a job when you get out. I think those things are real, and it happens across the board, right? Up and down in all different kinds of jobs. So I do think there's a real opportunity for the country to bring people into the military, bring more people into the military. I think it would be good for us as a society for people to feel like they have some skin in the game. And I think it could be great for the economy and for people up and down the economy to gain a skill set that they can then translate into civilian work. And beyond that, even there are a lot of companies who are interested in hiring veterans, not necessarily because of the specific skills that they pick up, but because of some of the broader skills that they pick up in terms of like problem solving and management. And I think there are a bunch of people, particularly at like lower levels of the military, who do some of that stuff effectively. It's not true across the board.
I don't think this broad companies hiring veterans campaign, it was kind of like fashionable a few years ago. I don't think it's a serious thing. Like, I don't think most of these companies want a lot of veterans around. I mean, they want to have it look like they do, but like, you know what I mean? And
I think some of that is related to the public perception problem that we're talking about right now, right? I mean, companies are going to be responsive to public perceptions, and whether they do or do not want veterans is probably less relevant in that vein than whether they want people to think that they do or do not want veterans.
It's veteran washing.
Public perception of the military and the veteran population is low, then they're not going to want people to think that they may still want to target the veteran community, but it's not going to be something they're doing like very, very publicly. Whereas if the perception of that community is generally high, then yeah, sure, they're going to want everybody to know. That's going to be something that they're really looking at. I do think you got to turn it around. Like you say, I wouldn't say that getting influencers to help is necessarily bad, but what I don't think you should be doing, just like we talked about China earlier, I don't think you should be spinning public opinion so that it's different when you haven't fixed the underlying problems. I think for the most part, Gen Z is responding to real concerns that they are seeing and perceiving, like you said, that actually exist within the military. And you start by trying to solve those problems. And then you present the fact that the military is a different place. I mean, those two things can certainly go hand in hand, but I think you actually have to solve it. You don't just spin it so that it seems fine. Yeah, and then somebody gets there, and like you say, the only thing they have is getting yelled at for not cleaning their room and like told to run more and kind of miserable and paid nothing. Like fix the problems and make it an attractive thing to do.
There's no effort to fix the problems or even acknowledge the problems because they're too out of touch. They go on in this quote to say the services are also expanding their marketing campaign propaganda to dispel misconceptions, which is like, you're wrong, not us. Vanessa Guillen was a misperception on your part. Afghanistan, Kabul was a misperception. You know what I mean? And I don't like that. You also said that, like, you know, they say countless opportunities. I don't think countless opportunities. You say, yes, a person can go and learn a job or intel or whatever, but it's like, that's any fucking job. A young person can go work anywhere and like get some experience and learn a job, and they won't be killed. And they might get and probably get paid more. So not only are they not cool because like the other young people don't, and like the way the young people look at it is like, you're a loser, like you had to join the military. So it's like,
and that's what needs to change. That's what needs to change. Because I would say it is easier. Yes, anybody can get a job, but actually it's really hard to get a job right now. It's really hard for a lot of people. And I think we've dealt for a while with people graduating from college and struggling to get a job, being woefully underemployed if they get a job at all. And the military can provide some capability for folks to actually get a job that maybe they would struggle to break into
And you just want like a bunch of college degree people that couldn't figure out how to get their first job staff in the military. I mean, like, come on.
So that's definitely that's not what I said, but it's also important to remember that like the reason people can't get a job is not always because they're incapable of accomplishing a goal. It can be a structural problem with the economy, right? These people were told that they needed to go do this thing. I mean, I think we all know that's true. There's a huge group of people who were told they need to go do this, need to go get this degree, and then all of a sudden the economy doesn't support them getting a job that they want and that pays them enough to pay off their school debt. There are tons of young people in that situation.
But were they all officers? We don't need officers.
And I don't want them all to be in the military. I'm just saying there are opportunities there. The military is one solution for some people. We don't need every person in the country to join the military. That's not a thing that we need in the US. But like we do need more to join the military, and we do need some of those people to be really good. And we do need, like you said, it to be an option on the table for young people. They need to look at it. And, people at all different parts of society, at all different levels of like capability, need to view the military as an option. And some of those people need to join. And it can be a really good solution for some of those people. But yeah, there are underlying issues. And sounds like Gen Z is probably correctly and justly perceiving problems within the military that make it not an option. And some of those things are problems with the military, and some of those are just public perception problems, right? Who's in the military? What is it? What kind of work do they do? What do you, right? I think there's a segment of society that doesn't interact with the military. We both know that. And I think that's part of the problem too. And part of that is also going to be a little bit of like public spin and messaging to change the perception of what the military can be and who belongs there.
You say it's a great option for all these people. The people it's a great option for are lower middle class, people from rural or southern or wherever, and they can kind of like get some money for college, like get some experience, and they might be able to kind of trajectory themselves out of the lower middle class into the middle or upper middle class, probably never becoming rich. The bargain is you have to risk your life and essentially submit to UCMJ, sacrifice out of your youth. Maybe you get killed, maybe you get raped, like whatever. And then, you don't have the GI Bill or something like that. We're basically just like incentivizing these people who need that or whatever, which I don't know if morally is great, because then all the rich kids, like, they're not going to do it. And then the other people are like the motherfucking lawyers who join to the Army Reserves to go on one deployment, like Beau Biden or Ron DeSantis or Pete Buttigieg, all these people who join the military just so that when they go up on the political stage, they can be like, that's a picture of me in an army uniform, but like they were never going to be killed. And they did it in a calculated manner in order to pad their resume for American politics. Everyone else has got something else better to do.
Yeah, I mean, like, it sounds like we're kind of on the same page here, but not entirely. But I do think there are problems within the military they need to fix. And there are also public perception problems that they need to fix. I think both of those are probably contributing to this to some degree. And it could present an existential crisis, right? As you move forward, we do need people. We need new people. And we should not have an ever shrinking pool of candidates who are even willing to consider the military as an option. And I think you pretty accurately described like who it provides most benefit to. But I think there was a time, if you go back, there was a time when the military was a broadly attractive option for people of all segments of society, including wealthy and well-educated people. Being military officers for a period of their career was an attractive option, and something, if for no other reason than to give back, was an option. But I think it also presented them with opportunities. And that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And that I don't think that's for the best.
Military officer is a working class thing, and you could be a general, you could be a colonel. Like these people out here in the real world who make real money, lawyers, like politicians, like a military officer is not someone that they like look up to. You know what I mean? Yeah, if it was like some hero, it's like some specific guy or some inspirational woman that flew the first plane or something, like, yeah, maybe, but they want you at their dinner party. But like, they don't fucking want you around. You know what I mean? Like, you're just a servant. You're just a servant that to serve their, bomb some city in the Middle East for them, or defend the border, or be there when the riots start or whatever. But they're living in a totally different world that doesn't intersect with military officers, or especially enlisted. They don't,
You do need people. Yeah, you do need people to stay and people to fill out the general ranks over time, right? And some people are going to have to stay. But the way organization works is the vast majority of people are in and out, right? They're there for a couple of years and then they're gone. And then a smaller number of people stay a little longer, right? There's attrition throughout the entire time. So I think making the military an attractive option for a couple of years for a lot of people is a great thing to do. And I think you can accomplish that. And yeah, you're right. Like the general officer is a different kind of person who probably comes from a different background. And maybe you're not going to get the lawyer to give up his multi-million-dollar a year salary through his career so that he can stay and be a general officer.
Why would he ever want to do that? My whole point is they don't respect them. Like the military officers are just like cogs in a machine. They're not like, oh, this big hero, like salute the flag, this fucking general just walked by or something like that. Like out in the civilian world, I mean, we just looked at the negative and positive. Like they don't give a fuck if you're a military officer. You know what I mean?
You can make this an attractive option for people. And yeah, you may be right that it's going to be really difficult to do for a job like that. But a lawyer, JAG, that's something you might be able to look at and say, like, that would be very difficult to make an attractive option. However, you can do it for a couple of years for people like you say. Maybe you're not going to get that person whose parents have a lot of money because they're not going to have debt. They're going to be able to go right into a law firm. They're going to be able to make a bunch of money. But you might be able to attract somebody from the sort of like lower income brackets whose parents don't have as much, who's really bright, went to a great school, but now is saddled with debt and would love 2-3 years where they could pay off their school debt or a huge piece of it, contribute to that mission, come out with experience, training, and then move into a job. Like these are pipelines that you can create, and these are capabilities that you can build, programs that you can create. And again, but it requires, like we talked about already, it does require reshaping public perceptions in the military and honestly what the on the ground truths of what being in the military is like. You got to fix that stuff so it becomes attractive. I don't think you should just say like that. That's not, to me, that is positive. And the more participation in all sectors of society that we have with the military, I think the more effective the military will be, the more engaged the public will be, the more thoughtful we will be about our military engagements. Like all those things are positives. So to me, bringing people in from across society is good. And we certainly, back to the core of what we were talking about, right? Like we don't have young people who are interested in joining the military now, and that's a huge problem. And if it continues on that trajectory, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem, even with the problems we have in the military as it is. We are a standing force that is protecting the United States and projecting power. And that's something we have to be able to continue.
The point I'm trying to make is that like the pinnacle of society has no intersection with the U.S. military. Officer, enlisted, whatever. The military is just like off to the side, a relic, outdated, shitty barracks, bad leaders, and that's where they're failing. Because like the young people are like, I want to be rich. I want to be a rapper. I want to be an influencer. I want to start my own company. I want to like marry rich, maybe. I don't know what they're trying to do exactly. But like they're not interested in the military. It's like one step up from prison, right? It's like, oh, you failed in life? Did you end up in prison? No. Did you end up in the military? Well, yeah, for a couple of years. I had to get my GI Bill, you know. I mean, it's like almost like they would be embarrassed to tell people that they were in the military or they had been in the military. You know what I mean? And honestly, like when I go around, I don't go around telling everyone in the military. There's people I deal with all day long. There's a lot of people I deal with that do not know I was in the military.
And I think some of that is the public perception problem that the military has, though, right? Because I think you and I both being in the military, yeah, there are problems, yeah. But I can tell you from personal experience, it's not a step up from prison. I think it was a good thing for me to do. I think I learned a lot from it. I got a lot of valuable experience, and it put me on a trajectory that put me in a great position in life that I would not have found prior to that, right? I look at the people that I was in college with and I look at like where they are and where I am, and they're two very different things, and I contribute wholly where I ended up with the sort of like the military time that I spent. So I don't think it's a step above prison, but I do agree with you that is public perception, and that's the kind of thing that you need to try to shift.
Yeah, perception is reality. Well, got your good take on that. That's the last article. You got any final words or final things you want to talk about?
No, I don't have anything else. I think this was a great discussion, though, and I think it's important. It's valuable. I'm glad I'm able to participate, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, thank you for thanking me. So I will thank you for joining me, and thank everybody for watching. And please watch next week, which I believe is Mary. So hopefully Mary next week. And see you guys then. Goodbye.